Hello, this is a synopsis of chapter 10, which examines strategy. And so basically in this chapter, we're talking about how to keep profit from eroding. In order to beat the competition, first of all, firms need to create a competitive advantage. Then they need to figure out how to protect that competitive advantage. And so that can be one of the main issues that companies face in the long run is how can you keep that competitive advantage? It's very difficult to do. And here's the reasons why. If a company has high profits, that can lead to complacency at the company. More importantly, high profits attract competition. So that's going to be one of the biggest factor that will erode at a company's profits. Also, new technologies can erode profits because new technologies can increase your competition, allow other people to even make better products than you have. So that erodes profits. And then there's always changing consumer preferences and changing business models, changing the way of doing business. Business models become unreliant. So, they become trying to think of the word. Basically, they just become inefficient or they go by the wayside. So, for example, if you think about how the internet has really caused a lot of companies to go out of business, Radio Shack being one. A lot of these retail companies, they just don't. They just are not. People, they just lost so much demand. Their business model wasn't viable anymore, and so they've lost out due to changing ways of doing business. All right. So anyway, all of these reasons really contribute to highly profitable firms regressing toward the mean. And so I didn't talk about this in the last synopsis, but if you look at the last chapter, it'll show you how firms that are highly competitive, firms that are highly profitable over time will be less profitable. And then firms that are at a loss over time tend to, not always, but tend to become more profitable. So you have this regression toward average profitability. The same is true, like if you're an investor, if you invest in stocks, a lot of stocks where the price has gone up and is way up, they tend to regress towards the mean. Likewise, if the price has really been beaten down, they tend to regress towards the mean. Okay, so anyway, we're talking about strategy. Remember in the last synopsis, I was telling you about the 4 types of competition, the 4 competitive environments, which is perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. And so let's talk about monopolistic competition. That's when you have a very competitive environment, but companies have figured out a way to differentiate their product. And so, this strategy is a big part of that. How can you use strategy to keep your profits from eroding, increase profitability, and keep your profits from eroding? One way to do it is, we'll talk about some ways to do it down here, but making your differentiating your product from your competitors is one of the main ways to also maintain your profitability, increase profitability, and maintain that. Okay, so anyway, here's a good rule of thumb regarding maintaining your sustainable advantage. You have to figure out what you want to do as a company. Do you want to be a low-cost competitor, or do you want to provide superior product at a similar cost? All right, product or service. Okay, so here's 2 ways that you can sustain a competitive advantage. You can either deliver the same product or service as a competitor, but have a lower cost, or you can deliver a better product or service at the same cost. So then again, this comes back to differentiating your product, which is what we see in these monopolistic competitive environments. All right, so then also, if you think about it, well, actually, let me back up for a second right here. when you're doing your report, think about the company you've been assigned. And if applicable, think about, what is their strategy? Are they trying to be a low cost? Are they competing on low cost, or are they trying to deliver superior product at the same cost? So what is their strategy there? All right. Then think about this also. Strategy, you could argue, is really just about either raising the price or reducing the cost. Okay. So you can look at figure 10.1 that talks about how strategy is really just about either trying to raise your price to increase your profitability or reducing your cost to increase your profitability. So Starbucks has been really successful at this. They've been successful at raising their prices. They're a very efficient company, but when you think about Starbucks, demand is so inelastic for their coffee, and there's just the whole package of going to Starbucks, the whole environment of Starbucks, in addition to having the inelastic demand. I wouldn't say they're obviously not a low cost competitor, but they're delivering a superior product at a similar cost, I would say, to comparable coffee places. And so they have really been successful at their strategy. So you can think about what other factors enable Starbucks to sustain a competitive advantage. It's not just about, well, their coffee's good for one, but it's really the whole climate or the whole culture of Starbucks when you think about it. So think about some other factors that help them to sustain a competitive advantage. For example, a few years ago, well, this was probably 10 years ago or so, McDonald's decided they were going to try to compete with Starbucks. And so they came up with these fancy coffees. Well, they're not real fancy, but if you go, they have the McCafe. And so you can buy lattes and so forth. They have 3 or 4 different ones. And so they envisioned people sitting in this little McCafe that they would have within the McDonald's ordering the coffee. Well, I could have told them that is not going to work. Your Starbucks customer is not going to go to McDonald's, and people don't think of going to McDonald's to have coffee. People go to Starbucks, or here, they go to PJ's or Starbucks. So, some things just aren't going to work for certain companies, because McDonald's has, for years, they've maintained a competitive advantage through lower costs. They can't all of a sudden switch and say, oh, well, we're going to have a superior product at a similar cost. Their coffee is lower cost, but they still weren't able to get these customers to switch from Starbucks to McDonald's. So anyway, you can think about some other companies too. What about Apple? Why do people pay so much more for Apple products? Well, the products are superior. Some people would argue. One thing that Apple has done, which we're going to see in a later chapter, is Apple they've tied all their products interface with one another, whereas Bill Gates with Microsoft didn't do this. But Steve Jobs, they would argue about this actually, because they were kind of friends, rivals and friends. And Steve Jobs said, well, I'm going to make all my products interface with one another, which is really brilliant when you think about it, because people don't like to learn new things over and over again. So if you have a phone that interacts with your iPad, interacts with your computer, you're going to be more likely to buy an additional electronic product from Apple if they all interface. Plus, they're good products, so people pay up for them. Also, there's a lot of compliments with Apple, the apps and so forth on the phone. Think about Chick-fil-A. How is Chick-fil-A able to sustain a competitive advantage over these other fast food companies? Well, they have superior service for one. The quality's good. So anyway, think about that. So you might be able to think of some other companies too that are able to sustain a competitive advantage. Okay, Porter's 5 forces. The most profitable industries are characterized by these characteristics. Now you can include this in your report if you want to. I'm not requiring you to include Porter's 5 forces or the SWOT analysis, but you can't, because when you take the strategy class, you're going to be doing this in depth with whatever company you're assigned in that class. I think it's BSAD 525. But I mean, it does kind of make sense to have it in the project. I don't require it, but if you want to include the Porter's 5 forces or the SWOT, that's fine. So just, but we don't go over it as much in depth as you will in BSAD 525. But anyway, let's look at these, at the Porter's 5 forces. So the most profitable industries are characterized by these characteristics. Low buyer power. That means that the buyers don't really have any control. They can't exert price pressure on the company. Low supplier power. The suppliers don't have any control over, or don't have a lot of control on you. So maybe, if, for example, if you were reliant on one or two suppliers, they would have a lot of power. So the more profitable companies, the buyers don't have very low power. The suppliers have very low power. There's high barriers to entry. That, of course, inhibits competition. And then there's a low threat of substitutes. So it's not, the product is not easily substitutable. So Chick-fil-A, think about that. Chick-fil-A, Starbucks, Apple, people perceive each of these products as low threat of substitutes, because Starbucks tastes a certain way. People, love their Starbucks coffee. Apples are unique. Apple products are unique. Chick-fil-A is unique as well. And I would add to this low threat of substitutes, I would add a high availability of complements also helps with profitability, like I was talking about with Apple Computer. All right. And then low rivalry among existing firms. So if there's not a lot of competition amongst the existing firms, that helps as well. So when you're doing if you add this to your project, think about these. Think about this is the best situation for profitability, or these characteristics. Okay, then they get into, at the end of the chapter, this is after Porter's 5 forces. You can also look at what we call a resource-based view, which means that firms with superior resources might be better able to sustain a competitive advantage. Well, what do we mean by resources? Well, resources can be equipment, firms that have better equipment, say, firms that are in better locations, or maybe own their real estate versus leasing it. And you can talk about firms that have more financial capital would be in a better competitive advantage. So let's talk it. So resources can be tangible, equipment, real estate, financial capital. But then resources can also be intangible, like the brand. What are some of the most recognizable brands in the world? Coke, Apple, Nike. So if you have that brand awareness, that brand recognition, that's huge. And then, of course, knowledge. The knowledge meaning the knowledge of your managers, your workforce knowledge, and then the organizational culture. How, is it a very cohesive culture that's very productive? That can make a big difference as well in your competitive advantage. Okay, then finally, here's 3 basic strategies to stay ahead of the competition. This is in section 10.3. So now this is kind of coming back to this, where I said strategy is really about raising price or reducing cost. But then also you can look at in the book, they talk about these 3 basic strategies to stay ahead of the competition, which makes perfect sense. Cost reduction. Okay, so that was up here with the cost reduction. Producing the same product or service at a lower cost. So think about Walmart, cost reduction, Southwest Air, Spirit Airlines. That's even more, even more low cost than Southwest Air. product differentiation, that would be delivering a superior product at a similar cost. So Starbucks is product differentiation. Various brands of eggs. So think about an egg. Back in the day, you went to the store and all eggs were the same. Just, basic white egg. Then an egg with a white shell. Now you can get eggs with brown shells. You can get free range chickens, not pasture, that's beef, but grain fed, free range, vegetarian grain chickens. What else? Then they have these certain brands like Eggland's Best and all these brands that are organic chickens and eggs where they give them certain feed to lower the cholesterol. So when you go to the egg aisle now, you can be paying anywhere from $2 or $2.50 for a dozen eggs up to $6. It's crazy. And so they've taken something that was basically a commodity and differentiated it to the point where people are paying, $6 for a dozen eggs, when you can get a dozen eggs, probably not that much different for $2. Perfect example of product differentiation. Okay, and then you probably aren't familiar with Purdue chicken. I think they mentioned this in the book. That's a back east, that's a chicken brand back east. Frank Purdue was really the first person to take a commodity and differentiate it. And he did it with chicken. So chicken was chicken. You didn't really care about the brand of chicken. You just bought a chicken. Well, he put his brand name, Purdue Chicken, and the chicken was supposed to be superior. And this was way back 40 years ago. And so he just was able to market his chicken so that people would pay up for it because just that the chicken it wasn't that it's healthy, or it wasn't the health food type situation like we're thinking today. It's just that it's a better chicken. It's to buy a Purdue chicken. It's a fatter chicken or what have you. So anyway, this product differentiation, some of the examples are Starbucks, Purdue chicken, various brands of eggs, and so forth. All right. And then the third basic strategy is, how can you try to reduce the competitive intensity? What's a way that you can reduce the competition? Well, this is a really interesting example. Of course, companies love this when the government comes in and actually reduces the competition. And so this is what happened with the US washing machine industry. And they talk about this in the chapter. So way back when Al Gore was vice president, I think was a while back, they decided that we're using too much water and we should save water. And so some years ago, they changed the regulations for US washing machines. And if you go, most of you probably remember the old fashioned washing machines of like 10 years ago, where you put your clothes in the washer, you turn the washer on, the washer filled up with water, the agitator turned the clothes around, the water, went down the drain, washing machine fills up again with the rinse cycle, rinses the clothes, and then it's done. Well, that uses way too much water, the government decided. So now we have these HE machines. So they basically, you can't get those machines anymore, the old type, because they use so much water. They want us to use less water. So we have these HE machines, and the HE machines, meaning high efficiency, the water is recycled and goes through the clothes, and they use a lot less water. Well, these machines are a lot more expensive. So basically, what that has done is it reduced the competitive intensity in that washing machine industry, and the prices have gone way up, and the profitability is way up thanks to the U.S. government. And so that's an example of a reduction in competitive intensity. Okay, so make sure that you make sure that you know all the terms and can know these highlights, the reasons why it can be difficult to keep a competitive advantage, Porter's 5 forces, the resource-based view, and also these 3 basic strategies to stay ahead of the competition. All right, and that's it for chapter 10.